Welcome to Orlando Matters on a Saturday morning. Today we're talking about the biggest legal stories of the past year. You know, 2014 is being called the year of the protest. From Ferguson, Missouri to New York City, grand jury decisions had the nation talking and walking. But first of all, we're going to start with a look back at the year in 2014. A lot of news happened. Shepard Smith has the look back.
2014 brought more gridlock in Congress, tension at home and around the globe, a deadly outbreak, and a historic election. The year started with a pay raise for low-income workers. Higher minimum wages took effect in 13 states, and President Obama signed an executive order raising the minimum wage for federal contract workers. Gay rights also took major steps forward. Same-sex marriage now legal in 35 states and the district after a series of federal court rulings throughout the year. 2014 saw the start of the worst Ebola outbreak in history. The virus has killed more than 5,000 people in West Africa. Thomas Duncan was the first patient diagnosed in the United States. Doctors say he came down with the disease in Liberia and died at a hospital in Dallas. His treatment led to the infection of 2 nurses who later recovered. Russia took over the Crimean Peninsula and stirred up even more trouble in eastern Ukraine. The U.S. slapped financial punishments on Moscow, and then the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine killed all 298 people on board. Pro-Russian rebels and government forces blamed each other. Another Malaysia Airlines flight, MH370, disappeared in March, and it's still missing. Despite an exhaustive international search, nobody has found one sign of that jet. In Washington state, a huge mudslide engulfed an entire neighborhood, destroying homes and killing dozens of people. General Motors recalled a record 30 million vehicles because of safety problems, including faulty ignition switches, blamed for at least 36 deaths. The CEO, Mary Barra, told Congress the company will do whatever it takes to compensate the victims. In Nevada, a tense standoff between the federal government and supporters of rancher Cliven Bundy. He refuses to pay grazing fees to the Bureau of Land Management. Most of the armed protesters left, but Bundy has not resolved his payment dispute. The militant group Boko Haram kidnapped 276 schoolgirls in Nigeria and threatened to sell them as sex slaves. At last word, activists said most of the girls were still in captivity. The first major tornado outbreak of the year hit the United States in late April. The twisters killed more than 30 people in the Midwest and the South. A major scandal rocked the Veterans Administration. The VA Secretary General Eric Shinseki resigned over the summer after revelations of long waits for appointments and secret waiting lists at VA hospitals. The department announced a major overhaul several months later. The Taliban released the American prisoner Bo Bergdahl in exchange for 5 detainees from Guantanamo Bay. The U.S. military launched an investigation into whether Bergdahl deserted his post before the Taliban captured him. The Islamic State began a major offensive, capturing huge areas of eastern Syria and northern Iraq. The American-led coalition launched airstrikes against ISIS targets, and the U.S. sent thousands of so-called military advisors to the ground in Iraq. But President Obama insists he will not send U.S. combat troops. Israel invaded the Gaza Strip over the summer. The conflict fueled by the killing of 3 Israeli teenagers by Palestinian militants. The fighting ended with a ceasefire. In the town of Ferguson, Missouri, protests turned violent after the police shooting of an unarmed teenager, Michael Brown. A grand jury decided not to bring charges against Officer Darren Wilson. That sparked new violence in Ferguson and protests all across our country. In August, Robin Williams took his own life at the age of 63. His suicide put a new spotlight on depression and mental health. In Pennsylvania, a huge manhunt for Eric Matthew Freen, the 31-year-old survivalist accused of shooting 2 state troopers, killing one of them. U.S. Marshals finally captured Freen at the end of October after he'd spent 6 weeks on the run. A milestone for Lower Manhattan. One World Trade Center opened its doors for the first time to new tenants more than 8 years after construction began. The 2014 elections ended with a GOP bang. Republicans winning control of the Senate and adding to their large majority in the House. Washington ended the year with a contentious fight over immigration reform. President Obama announced a plan to use executive authority to shield at least 4 million immigrants from deportation. Republicans say they're considering their options to block enforcement of that action. Looking ahead to 2015, we're waiting to see if the president and the new Congress can work together. And with the midterm elections behind us, the race for the White House is already heating up. Of course, we'll be here for all of it. In New York, Shepard Smith, Fox News.
It was a busy year, and we're going to take a look back at the year in legal issues. You saw some of them there on Shep's piece. Stephen Kramer with the Kramer Law Firm is with me now to talk about it. Good to see you. I always appreciate you being here.
Great to see you. Glad to be here.
Okay, let's start with one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story of the year. They're calling 2014 the year of the grand jury. We saw what happened in Ferguson. We also saw what happened up in New York City. A lot of people say they think the grand jury got it wrong. What do you think? Can you go back and evaluate these effectively to say whether they got it right or wrong?
You know, whatever the grand jury said, I don't know that everybody would be pleased either way. The criticism is about the result, especially with the Garner case in New York. I think a lot more people are upset about that case than the Ferguson case. I think there's a little bit more division about the Ferguson case because there was a lot more dispute in the facts. The Garner case was an incident everybody saw from start to finish essentially on video and made their judgment call right there, and a lot of people were upset, and really it crossed racial lines, it crossed political spectrum lines, it crossed all lines, and I think as a result, everybody has a little bit of a question as to did the grand jury get it right there, and I think most people doubt it.
A lot of prosecutors will say you don't really know that because you don't know what happened in the grand jury because it's supposed to be secret. Is that a fair defense of what happened there?
Well, I think I think that's a good question, but what you see is a lot of times the prosecutors will release information afterwards. We saw that in Ferguson, where the prosecutor really put it out there, and it seems like he tried to put almost everything in front of the grand jury, so that he couldn't get accused of kind of filtering one way or another, or trying to make the jury lean one way or another. You know, the issue and some of the criticism has been that in Ferguson specifically, that the defendant really doesn't generally have a right to come in and testify or put on what's called exculpatory evidence, which is evidence that would show that they're not guilty. Generally, the task of the grand jury is to decide whether there's a basis to make the charge or not. And that's part of the criticism there, is they had the officer come in and testify for hours. And really, a lot of people pointed to some Supreme Court cases and some commentary by Justice Scalia, who's a very conservative justice, on that point, and some notes and comments he'd made in the past.
Let's go for some Law 101 here then.
Sure.
People like me who don't understand, why wouldn't you just take it to a jury trial? If you want to hear both sides, you want to hear what went down, why go to the grand jury instead of just saying, all right, we're going to have a jury of your peers decide this?
Every state's a little bit different, and in many states you can charge people by indictment, and many states you can charge people by information, and depending on the state, that law is different, and they may have criteria where only some crimes can be charged by grand jury indictment and some can be charged by information. In Florida, we have both. We have information and we have indictment, and in these situations it may have been the legal requirement to actually charge them, or it may be the fact that the prosecutors wanted to show that they were giving that decision not to themselves but to the grand jury.
But it can also be an out for the prosecutor, right?
That's what they're doing.
My hands are clean. It was the grand jury who decided this, not me. It's off my shoulders. Is that?
That's exactly what they're doing there. You know, a lot of the commentary that's been coming out now is how do we solve this situation because of the criticism that's been mounted out there. You know, one of the solutions that's obviously been floated are the cameras on the police officers. Another solution that has been floated kind of in different camps has been, do we want to go ahead and bring in independent prosecutors? Because part of the criticism has been you've got prosecutors that are in the same community that are convening a grand jury, dealing with the very same law enforcement people they work with day in and day out. And people that are upset with the police and law enforcement, they like it. And some people that want to protect law enforcement, or they like it because they feel like, well, the grand jury would have made the same decision in Ferguson, whether it had been the prosecutor in that case or another outside prosecutor.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Still to come here on Orlando Matters. It was also a rough year for Bill Cosby, NFL players, and IT guys. Yeah, IT guys. We're going to take a closer look this morning at how the computer hacks across the world can impact companies and even your bottom line. Straight ahead here on Orlando Matters. Welcome back to Orlando Matters on a Saturday morning. We're having our legal roundtable, taking a look at the big legal topics of 2014. We have Stephen Kramer, of course, Kramer Law Firm, and also Dana Harris, defense attorney. Welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
You were off camera listening in on our conversation about grand juries.
Yes.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I think in the light of Al Sharpton, for example, recently came out and spoke against it. I think I'm not quoting verbatim, but I believe that he was basically grandstanding and speaking about how he believes that they want a jury trial by jury and not a trial by a grand jury. Well, there's a process, and historically, there's a lot of secrecy that goes behind indictments and taking something to a grand jury. Whereas here, I think that the scrutiny is now starting at such a pretrial level that there's almost a bullying going on with the media and some of these zealous advocates such as Al Sharpton, and that's going to, I believe, really cause problems with pushing the system and bullying the system. That it's not necessarily broken, but if we try to force it, we're not necessarily going to get an objective outcome, as we may have, even if that's being scrutinized. Whether or not we're getting a fair trial, at the end of the day, we got to let the system work.
And I think that's where some of the confusion comes, Stephen, is you hear people say, no, let's let the system work. Well, then when the system doesn't work in the way that they thought it should work, then they say, well, we're going to go to the next level. Well, where does that end?
Well, there's two different comments there. One is the system as it is playing out with grand juries at the state level, and the critique is on the system itself. The old expression is, you can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. Why can't you get an indictment here? That's the old expression. Taking it to the next level, that may be bullying, kind of like what Dana's talking about right there. When you get a result that you don't like and you say, well, let's try again. When lawyers do it, that's judge shopping, and when society does it, it's the same thing. It's effectively bullying, and you don't like the answer, you try to give a different result. Solving the problems that we might have in our system is one thing, but not accepting the result that the current system has, the current result that justice has meted out, I don't agree with that.
Why do I have a feeling we're having this discussion here at the start of 2015? We're going to have the same discussion at the start of 2016. Let's move on to another one of the big legal topics this year, sexual assault. We had the Bill Cosby situation. We had the Rolling Stone article on the University of Virginia. Let's start with Bill Cosby. A number of people now coming out saying that he sexually assaulted them 15, 20, maybe 30 years ago. Why now? Why do you think, Dana, that people are now coming out at this point?
Well, obviously, from a victim standpoint versus an overall objective look at it is going to be a little different. I think that there obviously was just enough people that finally had it, and there was enough evidence that they felt that they could do it, and then they needed to take a stand, and they wanted their voice, whether it's 10, 20 years later. Those victims, they felt that the time was right for them, that the media would support them. I think the community would support them. But I think, like we were just speaking about off camera, is that the biggest thing is Beverly Thompson here. I think that she's going to give these other victims really the voice that they needed and they wanted, and they're going to get closure. And I don't necessarily believe in this particular case that it's an attack on Bill Cosby. I don't believe it's an attack on the system. I believe it's victims that are together really finding some closure. And I think Beverly Thompson, being the first African-American female on the cover of Vogue, a very credible witness for her ordeal and her accounts that she's published with her experiences with Bill Cosby, I think that it's exactly what they need to get the ball rolling, because there are processes to finding out whether it's 10, 20 years later.
And in this case, I know police have recently talked to Bill Cosby, maybe the prosecutor's office as well. Do you go after somebody after it's been this long? It's probably past statute of limitations in this case, but do you even pursue this angle and say, well, what do you know?
In most of these cases, I think in almost all of them, we're well past the statute of limitations. I mean, some of these we're talking about almost 50 years ago. I believe the Los Angeles State Attorney's Office or District Attorney's Office has made an announcement that they're not going to pursue the one that might have been available, and that was the woman that had been a minor at the time she alleged the assault. And the problem is, even if they did choose to pursue these cases, they're stale. There's no evidence. There's no forensic evidence by any means. There's very few witnesses. Some of the witnesses may be dead now. How do you prosecute that case if you are law enforcement?
Now, if you're on the flip side, if you're Bill Cosby's attorney, there's that old saying, if it's not true, then sue. Yeah, so if there's no truth to these claims, wouldn't you go after some of these women who are coming forward and say, okay, you keep talking, well, we're going to sue you? Does it make any sense or no?
Well, I think that we may have a little bit of a Tiger Woods effect here at some point. I mean, there seems to be so many victims with such a similar story that at some point, and of course this is far after Bill Cosby's career has, hit its peak, and he's, let's say, in retirement. But I think that for the victims, they don't necessarily need their day in court, but yes, truth is a defense to slander. That's what we say, is truth is a defense. So if it's not, put your money where your mouth is. If it's, if it's provable, then prove it. If not, I mean, and Bill Cosby with the no comment, I mean, it kind of is one that he wishes would go away a lot quicker than I believe it's going to.
I'm sure. If it's not true, then sue. Do you agree with that or no?
I think that their strategy has been to lay low and let the storm blow over. He's got a very powerful, skilled attorney in L.A., Bill Cosby, and that has been their strategy. It almost sounds like, from the few comments that Bill Cosby's given, that he wants to talk. That he says, he gave one interview. It was, I mean, if you want to call it an interview, it was like 2 lines, and basically he really took an angle on maybe that the black press, the African American press, would get it right, and it kind of suggested that the mainstream press has not gotten it right, and he also seemed to suggest that he wanted to talk about it, but that his reps wouldn't let him talk about it. I think they're just burying their heads in the sand and hoping this passes over.
If I'm his reps, I say go to the Cayman Islands, lay low for a while. That's how I don't know what you guys would do. That's what I would say. Okay, coming up in our last segment on Orlando Matters, we're going to talk about the year of the hack. What damage has it done out there? We're talking about that. Plus, a local doctor gives his fiance quite the engagement gift. But who gets it when things fall apart? Welcome back to Orlando Matters. As we start off 2015, we're doing our legal roundtable to get the year started off. We have Stephen Kramer here and also Dana Harris. And so we're going to talk about a couple more issues here before we go. Let's start with the year of the hacker. All right, 2014, big year. We're talking Sony. We're talking
Jennifer Lawrence.
Everybody. I mean, for crying out loud.
Every other celebrity.
How is this going to play out legally when everybody's getting hacked? Not only companies, but individuals as well. What kind of legal issues do you foresee?
It depends on the hack. So when you're talking about big box stores getting hacked and credit card information getting out, when you're talking about banks having their information compromised and that getting out there, well, those companies are going to have some liability possibly if they didn't take adequate measures. When you're talking about celebrities that have had their naked pictures and private films and pictures put on the internet, I don't think you're going to see a lot of litigation there. We saw a lot of litigation threatened. We saw the attorneys for those actresses and actors threaten Google, threaten all these websites to not put it up, but we never saw any lawsuits come out of that.
And I've given this piece of legal advice, even though I'm not an attorney. I've given this legal advice many times on Good Day Orlando. Stop taking naked pictures of yourself.
That's what I said.
If you don't like naked pictures to be out there, then you're the one who might want to stop that.
Don't put them in the cloud.
Or be smart enough to negotiate contractual royalties.
Right, and get paid for it, or buy a Polaroid, which they were selling this past holiday season.
Kim Kardashian had the last thing done.
Right.
She made a career with that.
Right. So what are your thoughts on the year of the hack, as they're calling it?
Well, I'm disappointed to learn that, for example, I'm very excited to see the movie that's coming out, The Interview.
It's not coming out.
Well,
kind of.
Not coming out anymore.
Right.
Kind of coming out.
Which, I mean, I've been excited about this, and maybe it's a publicity stunt, who knows, I'm only hoping. That looks hysterical, but I mean, if we're getting to a point where these technological hackers can, like, decide what, I mean, they're censors. I mean, they're censoring what's making it out because of the whole fear. I mean, at some point, the virtual reality and technology is starting to become the reality, and reality is now dictated by that. It's going to become a little confusing but scary at the same time, right?
You know, maybe this is a legal issue, maybe it's not, maybe it's a throwaway, but I think about all these people who worked at Sony, who were just exchanging emails. You know, you and I writing back and forth, all of a sudden everybody sees our email conversation. Is the company, Sony, responsible for keeping that a secret and not getting out there to everybody. Do any of these employees have a case here?
They're actually suing.
Are they really?
There's actually 2 lawsuits by former employees against Sony saying that they didn't take adequate precautions to prevent this type of hack from happening. And when you look at Sony, you've got to look at the history of the company. They just had a huge, gigantic hack of the Sony PlayStation Network. It cost them $170 million or something.
Wow.
They were on notice. And, you know, whether you think this is a good movie or bad movie, whether you think the commentary or the satire is valid or not, you do have to question the thinking behind financing and supporting a movie that is talking about assassinating a sitting head of state. That's a bad idea. Legally or not, that's just a bad idea.
And it's a comedy. Like you said, that's the interesting thing. This is a comedy.
You change the names.
Yeah.
You make it a country that looks like maybe North Korea, if that's what you want to do. And a leader that looks remarkably like him. And use a little bit of a different name. That way you don't have this happen.
Hey, Charlie Sheen did that back in Hot Shots, back in the 80s. We remember this, right?
Part 2 or the original?
Yeah, Part 2, which was the best
And if I recall, Charlie Sheen's path, his career detoured quite a bit.
That's a good point. I want to save time.
Colors.
Right.
Colors travels. You look at any satire through history, that's what they do. This was maybe not a good judgment choice.
All right, I want to get to this last one. A local doctor who gives his fiancee quite the engagement gift. I believe it was like a $60,000 ring. All right, they're not going ahead with the marriage here. What happens to the property in a case like this?
I think it's hard to say, obviously, on a state-by-state case basis and a case-by-case basis. It just depends. The short answer is it depends. But in keeping with the theme that we have with technology and social media, it certainly seems like it's starting to affect even these personal relationship issues. Now, obviously, the doctor's kicking himself probably. It's going to probably come down to whether he considered these conditional promises, such as whether the precedent was met. I give you this ring with the condition that we get married.
So the proposal almost has to be like a legally binding contract. Will you marry me? And if you do not, I get the ring back.
And that's what it's
not very romantic.
No, and neither is a prenuptial agreement. And if you want to be sure that you don't have to worry about this issue coming up, you sign a prenuptial agreement. Here, traditionally, an engagement ring has been a conditional gift. I'm giving this to you for you to marry me. And if you don't marry me, then I get it back.
And my understanding in this particular case, and why I say technology is going to play a part, is with the social media. If it's true what has been written, and she posted, for example, let's say on Facebook or social media of the like, that she got the greatest gift in the world from this doctor
on her birthday.
On her birthday, the courts or reviewing fact finders definitely going to have to consider that. I mean, whether or not there was a gift, if it was given freely and without condition, then the doctor might be.
It is almost like a contract. If you don't fulfill the obligations of this contract, then it's off.
Well, and when you're talking about the ring, it's pretty clear, that's probably an engagement ring, especially if he bought it as one and it looks like one and she's wearing it on this finger. That's probably an engagement ring. But when you're talking about a dog, when you're talking about a Porsche, probably isn't going to qualify as a conditional gift. If you marry me, you get to keep the dog. I just don't see that one playing out.
All right. Well, it's going to be another busy year in the law. We're going to be seeing you guys a lot in 2015.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you guys being here today. It's always fun to catch up with a couple of attorneys. All right. Hey, we'll be back to wrap up the show here on Orlando Matters right after this. I want to thank you for joining us today for Orlando Matters. Again, I want to thank all my guests for joining me today, Stephen Kramer and also Dana Harris. Remember, the news on our sister station, Fox 35, begins at 8 o'clock. Have a great weekend. We hope to see you back here next week for Orlando Matters. We'll see you then.